The signing of the Abraham Accords in 2020 ushered in a transformation of relations between Israel and Arab countries. Referring collectively to agreements of peace, diplomatic relations, and normalization between Israel and its Arab neighbors, the Abraham Accords continue to provide an unprecedented opportunity to facilitate stability in the Middle East. Today, our panel will discuss the progress and potential of the Accords, including how the agreements can promote religious tolerance, economic prosperity, and American interests in the region. Our moderator is the Honorable Robert Greenway, President and Executive Director of the Abraham Accords Peace Institute. Previously, he served as the senior U.S. government official responsible for U.S. government policy for all of the Middle East and North Africa on the National Security Council. He executed prolific U.S. sanctions against Iran and was part of the team that negotiated the historic Abraham Accords. Robert is a highly decorated senior combat veteran of the U.S. Army Special Forces. Joining Robert today are Ambassadors John Ricolta, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Arab Emirates, and Ambassador David Fisher, former U.S. Ambassador to Morocco. Please join me in welcoming our esteemed panel.
Thank you very much.
Why don't you come on down? Let's get close. Let's make this a personal conversation.
Well, thank you, Noel, for the kind introduction, for all the hard work for you and the team that's brought this incredible event together. Thanks to the NRB as a whole and all of the participants. Thanks to the audience, everyone here that's joined us today. We're grateful for the opportunity, and thank you also to Tyndale House Publishers for sponsoring this panel. A couple of points I'll make up front, and then we'll allow both of these good friends and distinguished ambassadors to provide their comments. We'll follow with a couple of questions to talk about the origins and significance of the Abraham Accords, some perspective on the opportunities which would, I think, impact and converge perhaps with your own, and then talk about what we can expect thereafter, and close with our observations. And hopefully, as a result of it, you'll have a better understanding of the Accords, its impact on the United States, Israel certainly, and perhaps your work. First, I would say that the Accords are, in fact, a historic and an unprecedented opportunity for Israel, for its neighbors, and for the United States to build a foundation of peace that we've not seen in a generation. I don't think any of us, I don't think anyone could have appreciated when the Accords were established just almost 3 years ago this year, that we would experience for the first time in generations a land war in Europe, and for the first time in generation the signs of tangible, concrete peace between Israel and its neighbors. And yet, here we are. This is, at the end of the day, an area that's better known for its conflict than for its peace, the absence of peace. And so I think that also tends to make this something that is historic, and it's worth encouraging. The progress, I would posit to you, has been real. It has been sustained. Israel has made peace with Egypt in 1979, with Jordan in 1994, with U.S. support and assistance. But the connections between those countries never expanded to the full potential. What we're seeing in a very short period of time is a tremendous amount of progress. Already, in just under 3 years, $3.4 billion of trade between Israel and the new Abraham Accord member countries, an 82% increase just in the last year alone. 470,000 Israeli citizens have visited their Abraham Accord member countries in the period of time since the Accords were concluded. It's a staggering figure when you think about it. I don't often mention it, but the reality is there are more kosher restaurants in Dubai, United Arab Emirates, than there is in Washington, D.C. right now. And hopefully that's something that will get rectified for those that observe. But it's interesting to consider how fast and how real that progress has been. I would also state that the potential that exists is far greater than what we've seen. That integration between Israel and its neighbors brings about an economic potential and an integration that can truly transform the region in new economic activity and in job growth and increased and expanded trade. And our belief overall in negotiating the accords was that the economic foundation between Israel and its neighbors would provide the basis for a strong and enduring relationship. In other words, that The trade between the countries would be something that they would protect and defend and preserve. And I think that stands. The potential, as I think we'd all recognize, is in the end peace, the prosperity that it provides, and the hope that both offer the region. The last I would leave with you is that the Institute that I'm fortunate enough to be a member of, and for which I thank both ambassadors for being on our advisory committee, we have the potential to support and assist the strengthening and expanding the Accords, but I would say that all of you do as well. And that the Institute and the growing network of partners that we have in this effort would also like to support and assist where it makes sense and where it's appropriate, your efforts where they converge in the region. The door that is opened in religious tolerance and opportunity is not something that exists for just its members, but truly all those that support the Accords. And so we look forward to working with all of you and other partners to lock arms in common cause to strengthen and expand the Accords, because if you don't reinforce it, you're unlikely to see it. And it will require external support and assistance, I think, to endure. We're fortunate enough today, as you know, to be joined by two individuals that played seminal roles, critical roles, in establishing the Accords, in their signing, and in the immediate implementation, which, as you would all recognize, the first weeks and months of any agreement are critically important. And the two gentlemen that are thankful for joining us today played critical roles. The first I'd like to introduce and welcome for his opening comments, Ambassador David Fisher. Served as our ambassador to the Kingdom of Morocco from 2019 to 2021. It would have been earlier, and you may hear about the delays encountered, but we're grateful to have had him there and fortunate. He received the National Security Award from President Donald Trump and the Wissam Alawite Order of the Commander of His Majesty King Mohammed VI. Try and say that 3 times fast in quick succession. Following his tenure as ambassador to Morocco, Ambassador Fisher returned to Michigan and resumed his role as the chairman of Suburban Collection Holdings, Tier 1 supplier of logistics management conglomerate to virtually all automakers serving North America. And I'll have to say up front that if you enjoy the car you're currently driving, you can thank these two gentlemen probably for it in some way, shape, or form. Ambassador Fisher, thank you for joining us today. I turn the floor over to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I have a couple of questions first. And no, I'm not going to ask if anyone has an Oldsmobile. How many of you been to Morocco? How many have been to Israel? All right, let's try the UAE. How many of you know where the Western Sahara line used to be? We've got one constant out there. Okay. I think the thing we want to talk about is how and why we got there and what is going on in the world today. When you think of the tectonic plates that have shifted, the work that has been done, I have to thank this gentleman on my left. I have to thank President Trump, Jared Kushner, General Carrera, Robert O'Brien, the folks in Washington that worked so hard to help bring this to fruition. When Jared toured the Middle East and began to understand from Israel to Morocco, the time was right. The world was shifting. Remember when we were going to move the embassy in Israel? People said the end of the world was coming. It was met with joy. The time is right for the Abraham Accords to bring conversation and peace. The Arab powers, our friends, see changes in the world. They know that they have to crystallize on a common enemy, or frenemy, as I might call them in Iran. And they need to do this through conversation, through trade, through reliance. It's not enough that Jordan and Egypt had recognized Israel. Israel needed to be recognized by that entire part of the world. You might remember that Morocco is our oldest ally, and the United States is Israel's oldest ally. For us not to have mutual partnerships with them, it makes no sense. So the fact that Israel, Morocco, the UAE, and Bahrain, and the Sudan today, to some extent, we have great opportunities for trade, reliance. We need to grow food. We need to do the things, as Mr. Greenway mentioned, with a war in Europe, the breadbasket of Europe is not really a player right now. How do we help grow that food? So I guess one of the things that happened that I would like to talk about, and then I'm going to move this along, there's two types of diplomats. There's a political appointee, and there's a foreign service career. The president appoints the career or the political appointees. It's a particular note to me that the people that worked on the Abraham Accords, John Rakolta, David Friedman, myself, were political appointees. When you look at Rob Greenway, when you look at Jared, we are all people that came to government from a different place. We're there to get something accomplished. We have goals we want to meet, and we could see that there's much value in this. The State Department, while tried and true, they worked with us a little bit, but I would have to say to you, if you want to know where things are happening, if you look at this headline we're showing, which is out of Saturday's Wall Street Journal, the Persian Gulf states see a new reality. There's another picture there that I like of a new Lamborghini that's going to come up. That Lamborghini is not on a racetrack in Italy. That's in the desert of the Sahara. Now, why would you do that? Because that's where the world is going. That's the moneyed capital of the world. And we need to bring these powers into conversation and to bring them forward. John, are you going to?
Sir, thank you.
Let me introduce you first, though, so at least folks have a sense of what you've done and what you currently do. Ambassador John Rakolta Jr. is the former U.S. Ambassador to the United Arab Emirates, Commissioner General of Expo Dubai 2020, a story itself. Serving from 2019 to 2021, he played a critical role, as I said, in negotiating and signing the Abraham Accords, for which he was awarded the National Security Medal by President Trump. Currently, Ambassador Rakolta serves as the chairman of Walbridge, a privately held construction company founded in Detroit in 1916. The company is one of the largest contractors in the United States, consistently ranked as the top U.S. builder of automotive and manufacturing facilities. We're delighted to have him with us this morning. Sir.
Thank you very much. I am both honored and delighted to be here, and I've got a bunch of slides that I'm going to run through very, very quickly so that you can understand how the Abraham Accords came about and the context of what preceded it, because I think it's very, very important. My journey from Detroit to Abu Dhabi was long and difficult. Senate confirmation isn't easy for anyone. In my case, there was a real attempt to disrupt the Trump foreign policy agenda by stopping me and Ambassador Fisher. Traditional wisdom believed that peace between Israel and the Palestinians was necessary before peace with other Arab nations was possible. If you take a look at the peace agreements that preceded us, the Camp David Accords with Egypt in the 70s, the Oslo Accords with Jordan and the Palestinians, which failed in 93, and then finally the Israel-Jordan peace agreement in 1994. Yes, there was peace. It stopped war, it stopped much of the violence, but it did not classify as a warm peace, and very little trade and economic prosperity came about as a result of this. So that's number one. Secondly, the Emiratis had signaled in early 2018 that under the right conditions and circumstances, normalization was possible. And it was my job to convince them that the USA under President Trump had reversed course and saw the UAE not only as a strategic ally, but one of utmost importance. And that did not occur during the Obama administration with the signing of the JCPOA, which is a long name for the nuclear agreement. Now, I've shown up here slide number 6 for me, and this is what it looked like when I got there. There was conflict everywhere. Civil war, Syria civil war in Yemen. And this kind of conflict and war had been going on for 100 years in the Middle East. Working with President Trump was an unbelievable experience. And everybody asked me, what was he like? How was it that you were able to deal with him? And he took a direct interest in making sure that normalization came about. And I had meetings with him. He is thoughtful, he is polite, he is inquisitive, he asked brilliant questions. But the most important question that he asked me is, how could he help me advance this agenda? I was probably only one of 4 or 5 ambassadors that actually got to meet with the president before I went out to post. And the picture on your right is my final meeting with him, where I said to him, help me get the Emiratis the F-35 weapons program, because it was a symbol of how the United States treats their best partners. The United Emirates, young country, it's only 50 years old. This is the founder. And Sheikh Zayed is pretty much the George Washington of the UAE. He brought 6 emirate rulers together in 1971 and said, we've got to form our own country, and thus came the United Arab Emirates. The values of this country is what I really want to stress today. These values are exactly the same as ours, and the reason that the Accords are called the Abraham Accords is because all 3 of the most dominant religions in the world, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, all have their beginnings in the Book of Abraham. And when you take a look at what their values are, they're exactly the same as ours. And in fact, they refer to themselves as the small d democracy. And using soft power is so important today as opposed to hard power. Hard power is destructive and it makes no friends whatsoever. And our job throughout the Abraham Accords was to introduce the United States as a soft power nation. We did that first by solving a very big problem for the Emiratis. They had this giant World's Fair called Expo 2020 Dubai. And our Congress at the time rejected us spending any money on a U.S. pavilion. And that's the circumstances that I went out to post under. Fix it, they said. And the way we fixed it is we got the Emiratis to give us a gift of $60 million in order to build a pavilion, staff it, and participate in the largest World's Fair that ever happened. This was critical to our relationship. And on January 3rd, I showed up in the office of Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and actually begged him to take the money, because up to that point in time, virtually everyone in the State Department said no. He agreed, and 7 months later, you can see me standing into our finished pavilion. This was a big deal to the Emiratis. The fact that we would accept their money, because the prevalent feeling was that the Emiratis were a small nation and it was humiliating to the United States of America to have to take money from a smaller nation. The second thing that was going on is what we will refer to as an Abrahamic family house. This was the Emiratis' attempt to bring the 3 religions of the world together in this huge complex, cost them $3 billion. This is a rendering of what it looks like: a church, a synagogue, and a mosque. And this was supposed to be the center where learned men could come together, and rather than finding the differences in our religion and fighting about them, we would come together and we would figure out how we could move forward in peace and harmony. As a result of this soft power, my wife and I decided to change course, and rather than bringing U.S. art into our residence there, we made our residence a cultural center for Middle Eastern art. And this is the art. and you could see our lower level of our residence. Most of the furniture was taken out except for the dining table, and the place was scattered with this art that showed all of the conflict that the Middle East had been going through for quite a bit of time. I'm going to just tell you a little bit about each painting. The first one on the left is called Al-Mulatham. It depicts an anonymous Arab warrior. The piercing eyes are of a painter himself, and the flowers symbolize peace together and the fundamental juxtaposition of danger and beauty of the enduring crisis in the Middle East. The picture on the left, the blue, is untitled, and it's 4 men who are hostages and visible only from their backside. Their feet are tied, their hands are tied, and the background is all black and represents the schism between them and freedom that they seek and the torture that they are about to receive. Torture is a powerful tool in the Middle East these days. Next, the Piata, children of Abraham, they call it, an Iranian artist attempting to build bridges between Iranian protagonists and Western lifestyle. The one on the right is the bombing of the U.S. Embassy. And this painter witnessed this when he was 7 years old and couldn't believe, because nothing of the building here is clearly definable, and the sky yet has beautiful roses, which is a symbolism in Arab culture of peace, and the attempts to capture the tragedy of the 15-year civil war and the endless conflicts of the Middle East. And our home was filled with 70 of these cultural icons that allowed us to have conversations with the Emiratis that we've never had before. Next, problem number 2, stale conversations. Our way of conversing with our allies is one of a bit of arrogance and hard power. I saw it a different way, being a political appointee, and I asked the president if we could conduct a strategic dialogue, and the National Security Council said yes, and the Emiratis immediately came to the table. We had 6 pillars of study, and the Emiratis then asked us for the 7th, which was human rights. We were floored. The Emiratis and the rest of the Gulf had all been noted for the lack of human rights, and yet here, the Emiratis wanted to show America how much progress they had made and how much progress they wanted to continue to make. Then came the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords are very simple. It is a 247-word document of an aspirational promise of peace and prosperity is so much more powerful than destruction and death. And every country came to it, and I have to give the Emiratis all the credit in the world, because they were the first ones to the table, did it on their own, in secrecy, because they knew that the Arab League would not be in favor of this, but they felt it was the right thing to do. And what was it about the Abraham Accords that caused them to want to do this? There's some practical reasons, aside from the soft power. They have an oil-based economy that is transitioning into knowledge-based. Most people don't understand that out of the 10 million people that live in the UAE, only 1 million of them are Emiratis. They have 9 million guest workers. How do they get those people to stay and make the Emirati their home and their retirement? They do it by opening themselves up with religious freedom, freedom of movement, freedom of capital. And all of those things make the Emiratis and the UAE a much more desirable place to visit and to live in. This is the big celebration in Washington with the president, his entire hierarchy of officials, and the Emiratis celebrating on September 15th, which was the actual day of the signing. And here you see President Trump signing it with Israel, Bahrain, and the UAE. This is the first commercial flight from Israel to the UAE, a very, very important starting point, because without travel, you can't get to these places. 1,000 miles away through almost all the desert. And as Robert Greenway said, 430,000 Israelis have already come to the UAE. The potential is limitless. Finally, and I think this is one of the most highlighted days of my entire life, the national security advisors from the USA, UAE, and Israel gathered in Abu Dhabi in October of 2020. Each spoke about the promise of the Accords. Mayor Ben Shabbat went last. That's the guy with the red arrow. He's the national security advisor of Israel. He recalled his life as a young boy, wandering and wondering if he would survive the constant onslaughts that were taking place between Arabs and Jews. He often wondered if he would ever be able to visit an Arab capital. And here he was that day, not only in an Arab capital, but standing in the palace of a ruler. He then asked if he could say a prayer in Hebrew. The UAE National Security Advisor, His Highness Taknoun bin Zayed, invited him to continue. And Meir ben Shabbat said, it was only through the grace of God that this normalization was able to occur. And he wanted everyone to know that God was present in that room today. And on that day, and thanked him for the tremendous blessing that Israel and the Arabs had received. There wasn't a dry eye in the place, including my own. I too felt the presence of God that day. It's my job to create a diplomatic climate and repair the broken trust. And I'm sure we're going to have a lot of good questions and answers to proceed from this point forward. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks very much, Ambassador. The first question I would have is on the impact of the Accords. And then I'll have a similar question because I'm interested in both perspectives. What do you think the Accords impact has been on, first, the countries themselves, which you've addressed in general, but also on the United States? Why was this an important negotiation and an important historic agreement for the United States?
I would say that the first and foremost important aspect is the stability that it brought to many relationships, just not the one between the signees of this accord. That stability has been lacking in the Middle East for a very, very long piece of time. The second thing is that the UAE became a beacon of modernity. The UAE, if you were to go there in 2019, most people say Jews weren't allowed in and there was no religious freedom, and it's absolutely not true. There are churches, there are Buddhist temples, there are synagogues. They have crossed the Rubicon in understanding the need to have a multicultural, diverse society that gives every single freedom to each individual so they can live their life the way they see. And that beacon they have become is something for all the other Arab nations to eventually emanate and emulate, because at the end of the day, the world can no longer afford our weapons are so powerful today. You can see this in Ukraine, that Ukraine as a country is destroyed from an infrastructure base, and it'll take 50 years to 100 years to rebuild it. We can no longer have that, and we need to use our soft power, our cultural institutions, our love of God to be able to spread this word throughout the world. And I can tell you that every single Muslim that I met in the UAE believes exactly the same way.
Ambassador Fisher, absolutely. I think it's exactly the right sentiment, and I couldn't agree more. Ambassador Fisher, Morocco's in a slightly different position than its Gulf states, than the Arab countries, the Persian Gulf, including the United Arab Emirates. It had diplomatic relations many decades ago with Israel. They were broken off because of friction, and so this was a resumption. But at the same time, I don't think that diminishes the significance at all. In fact, the opposite. From your perspective, what has the impact been on Morocco, and why do you think that it matters for Israel and the United States?
Thank you, sir. I believe the first thing we should recognize is the cultural diversity of Morocco. There's about 37, 38 million people that live in the country. It is mainly a peaceful Sunni Muslim country, but the country is rich with Christian churches, cemeteries, Jewish synagogues, cemeteries. The king himself has kosher kitchens for his Jewish guests. During the Second World War, there were probably 400,000 Jews living in Morocco. The Germans approached the Sultan and suggested, rather heavy-handedly through the Vichy French, that they could rid the country of their Jewish problem. The Sultan responded, "We have only Moroccans in Morocco." Israel will never forget that. There is a long and rich relationship, either out in public or during difficult times behind closed doors. But Morocco and Israel together will prosper with Israeli technology, with some money from the UAE, with I think Morocco has about 52% of the world's phosphate. They have legions of graduate engineers. They can unlock the Middle East. And even when I was having my discussions with Foreign Minister Barita about the recognition of the Accords, their version of the Accords, we knew then, we know today, that's where everybody wanted to be. We were very pleased that after the election, that the foreign minister, the king, President Trump, signed the accords in the Moroccan version, and the current administration embraced them, and we are going forward with the best possible way to bring the Middle East to one harmonious conclusion. I think that's the best right now.
There's no question, I think, of the impact that it has. I know the Israelis remarked that in many ways it was deeply significant that they're making peace the first time in a generation with their Arab neighbors in the Persian Gulf. But because of the popular, the emotional, and the familial connections between so many Israelis who have Moroccan heritage, including, as you mentioned, Mayor Ben Shabbat, at the time, Israel's national security advisor, went to the first flight also to Morocco and delivered his remarks in the King's compound in Darija, in the native tongue in Morocco, and that had an enormous impact and reminded the Moroccans and the Israelis that they have a heritage that is unique between the two countries. And Mayor's family, his father, his parents were both born and raised in Morocco. And so that connection is deep and is not to be forgotten. Ambassador Ricolta, you mentioned a number of things, including the Abrahamic family house, its construction and its origin, which predates the Accords and reflects a trajectory that the Emirates have been on. We note that since the house has opened earlier this year, and the Emirates have become first in the region outside of Israel to begin formally teaching the Holocaust and incorporating that into their educational curriculum. Again, a demonstration that this is serious, that this is real, and that it matters. How do you think that we can continue to promote the open door of religious tolerance that the Abraham Accords represents? And what steps do you think can be taken to recognize it?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that this represents such a significant shift in the attitude toward Israel by an Arab nation that you can't talk enough about that. It's the equivalent of the Cold War ending and the wall coming down between Eastern Europe and West. That's how significant it is, because up till this point in time, there's no cell phone traffic, no airlines, no banking, very little trade, some under-the-table security cooperation. And this has completely changed the dynamics, number one, on that kind of a significant shift. Number two, just the Middle East has about 500 million people in it, which is the same size, quite frankly, as the North American free trade market. The amount of trade and inter-region trade and investment that can go on is unlimited. And their next step now is to break down the barriers, tariffs, and allow free trade to happen amongst the countries. That's the second thing that can happen. And the third thing that can happen is most of these Arab states already speak a lot of English. And speaking English in both Israel and all of these Arab states has this advantage of being able for social interaction to get deep. And so the Abraham Accords have opened all of this up. And now you ask me, what can we do to further this? Well, here in the United States, there's so far only one constituency that I've seen that have an interest in preserving and advancing the Abraham Accords, and that is the Jewish diaspora. By and large, while Christians support it, that's about as far as it goes. Warm support. And one of the things we Christians can do is to take a much more active role in making sure that this peace is preserved and that these countries become better allies because, like I said, they have the same values, they speak the same language, and they need to build the same kind of social and religious institutions that we have here in our country.
All valid points, no doubt. And I think it's important to remember that support for Israel, one of the most tangible things we can do, and the most concrete things we can do is advocate for the Accords. Peace between Israel and its neighbors ultimately is the bulwark against uncertainty and risk in this part of the world. And the stronger Israel's relationships with its neighbors, the more resilient they can be. And I think it's important for us to remember that. Ambassador Fisher, along the same lines, we talked about, at least briefly, the familial connections between the two countries. There are 20 synagogues in Casablanca alone, a dozen kosher restaurants, which I've eaten in some of them, they're very good, 4 Jewish schools, 167 Jewish cemeteries across the country which have been preserved. And they've recently opened the House of Memory dedicated to the familial ties between Jews and Muslims. From the Moroccan perspective, how significant is this stream of tolerance? How serious is it? And what can be done to encourage and strengthen it?
Well, thank you, sir. It is one of the benchmarks for a number of reasons. First of all, the king, the parliament in Morocco are built on the pillar of being open, and religious tolerance is a big piece of that. The king himself, pardon me, as I mentioned earlier, maintains the synagogues, the churches. He is interested in creating tourism. Tourism is a pillar of the Moroccan economy. But more than that, when you think about North Africa, you think of where Morocco is. They are 8 miles from Spain. They're an integral part of the EU, but they are the gateway to Africa. Morocco has a free trade agreement with the United States, with Britain, with EU, with 6 Gulf countries and 31 countries in Africa. They want to be inclusive. They want to bring trade. They want to bring people. They want to bring investment. They want to be part of the future of this part of the world. While we speak of Iran, there are other evildoers in the area. We have Russia and we have China that are working to bring difficulties, and helping Morocco cement their relationships with their Arab brothers is really the best thing they can do right now. And they are spending the bulk of their time trying to make sure that the Arab brothers maintain an open and an economic outlook. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have time, unfortunately, to talk at greater length about the security cooperation, the potential, and the vital role that Morocco has to play. But it struck me in the past week alone that now some 43% of Islamic-motivated Salafi jihadi terrorism that we track around the world, now 43% of it has occurred in last year in the Sahel, the region that Morocco inhabits. So important to remember that cooperation is critical. Ambassador Rakolta, we alluded to the economic significance, the importance of it, the priority placed behind it, the role that businessmen have played in the formation of the Accords. The Middle East itself, it's important, I think, to remember the economic significance that it holds for us and why that's important to us and to the world. 31% of global oil production, 18% of gas production, 48% of its proven reserves, at least 12% of global trade transits the region, 30% of containerized traffic alone, $1 trillion a year in goods transiting the region. And for those that are mindful of our transition to an information-based economy, 16 of the world's major subsea cables, 30% of the world's information transit this part of the world. And so from our perspective in forming the Accords, this was a way to stitch together our partners and allies in the region, chiefly including Israel, so that we could preserve that for our own interests, for theirs, and certainly our partners and allies. But we're not the only ones with an interest in this part of the world. Over 40% of China's energy comes from this part of the world, and that's increasing, not decreasing. And that is not lost on certainly those in Beijing or in the region. How do you see it? How do you see the Abraham Accords potentially providing an option to counter Chinese influence in the region?
Well, that's a complicated question and an even more complicated answer. So let's start here. The UAE is the wealthiest country in the world, not only on a per capita basis, but perhaps even on just a basic basis. They have invested their oil over the last 50 years, their oil revenue, in ways that no other country ever had. They have trillions of dollars invested around the world, and they see that as their strategic asset and use it very judiciously. That's number one. Number two, they're traders. They have been traders throughout their whole history. Dubai was a central point between Southeast Asia, India, and the British Empire. Three, they love to trade. And there was a point in time where the United States was their most important trading partner. We used to buy 50% of our oil out of the Middle East. Today, we only buy less than 7%. Contrast that to China. China buys an enormous amount of oil from Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iran, Iraq, to fuel their economic development. And the Emiratis are only too happy to sell it to them. And they know that may only be the biggest market that they have. Their trade with, the combined trade between the UAE and China is $100 billion a year. The trade with the United States is only 25 today. But yet, if you were to sit down with an Emirati, they would say to you, they love America. I never heard them once say they love China. They know that the Chinese, the society, the way they're built, there is no freedom. It's autocratic. They send their children, 2,500 Emiratis are currently in university here in America. Every one of the officials I met have a vacation home in America. They love the values, Abraham values in America. So the Abraham Accords, we need to up our game. We need to create a more stable environment for them. We have to have them believe that our security umbrella, which is the only security umbrella in the world, there is no other country that can have a security umbrella like the United States, and that umbrella is needed and necessary to advance the Abraham Accords and to protect it so it can continue to grow. This, in turn, will attract more foreign investment, more businessmen, more tourists, more people to go to the UAE to appreciate the difference that their society has made in the Middle East and how it is becoming closer and closer to America. David asked the question, how many people have traveled to the UAE, and it looked like maybe 20%. I would encourage every single person in this room and in this conference to go to Abu Dhabi and tour the Louvre, the new Guggenheim Museum, their mosque, their Abrahamic house, and get a better appreciation for how different they are than they are perceived in the press today. And I believe that this and the advent of the Abraham Accord will bring a bright future not only to America, to what our values are, but to the betterment of the Middle East.
hard to improve upon and wholeheartedly agree. The last question, and then we'll provide some closing observations for you, Ambassador Fisher, is for the first time in Israel's 75 years, which we're celebrating now, I think the real prospect for warm peace between Israel and its neighbors, not simply the cessation of hostilities, which is equally important, but in this case, a real warm peace and the potential for bridges built between Israel and its neighbors that we've not seen. Why is it important for the United States to play a critical role in this? And how do you think we and our partners and allies can play a critical role in their development?
Well, without the United States, our Israel would not be what it is today. We have been a defender, a supporter. We have helped Israel become what it is, but they have driven that. Their creativity, their skill set, their desire, living under constant fear has developed a mindset for Israel. We need to be there. The world needs an influential, a well-capitalized, a well-run United States to support freedom, democracy, and prosperity around the world. Religious freedom is absolutely paramount to this. When people go to another country, they want to be able to practice their faith. So we need to be part of the future. It seems the United States has been withdrawing from the world stage, either lack of understanding or a lack of those countries' problems. We need to be there and we need to be a player.
Could not agree more. Let me ask briefly for closing comments from each of you, and then we'll bring our session to a close. Ambassador Ricolta, your closing thoughts.
Well, I'd like to first by saying that not all Arab states are created equal. There are enormously wealthy ones who have marched a long way toward modernity, and there are other ones that are barely surviving in many, many broken states. First thing is to give the UAE the space that they need to continue to advance their society and give them the freedom to be able to make decisions concerning other Arab states and how they should be treated within the confines of the Arab League. Number two, soft power is so powerful today in the world with the internet and Twitter and all of the ways that we're able to communicate. There are no secrets in the world. And when you go to foreign lands, you find that every single person wants exactly the same future as we want. Safety, a better life for their children, access to health care, food security, and education for their children. Number three, there's no substitute for peace and prosperity. And the United States and its businessmen have to get more engaged. It isn't that difficult anymore to do business 9 time zones away. Most of it's done off of Zoom and Teams anyways. And if you were to visit the UAE, you would see a completely modern society that has eclipsed the United States in terms of poverty and access to health care. Finally, we should wear our beliefs right on our shoulder, out and open, because I had some unbelievable conversations with the Emiratis about religion, and they're more than happy to talk about Islam and Christianity and Judaism, both in positive ways. The Muslim religion has many beautiful parts to it. They want the same kind of advancement of community, of love, of respect, of tolerance, just the way we do. And I think that the Abraham Accords builds the foundation for us to be able to do that.
Thanks, Ambassador Ricolta. Ambassador Fisher, your thoughts?
Yeah, I guess, first of all, I want to tell you it's an honor to be here with you today. I want to thank you for taking time to come to listen to the story of the Abraham Accords. Without, and I'm going to repeat myself, without President Trump, Robert O'Brien, Jared Kushner, Avi Berkowitz, General Carrera, this gentleman right here, Rob Greenway, the accords wouldn't have happened. It shows you the difference people can make. And the time was right. The Israelis knew it. The Arab countries knew it. The UAE knew it. Morocco has wanted it. They'd had it in the past. They knew what it was like not to have it. Egypt and Jordan are all part of this. But it takes people willing to talk about tough subjects and do creative things. So this was an absolute opportunity to do the right thing at the right time. And I can speak for myself. I was honored to be part of it, to see it happen, and to watch it prosper in the future.
Thanks, Ambassador. Drawing us to a close, I would offer only that there has been a lot of bad news. This era seems to be replete with it. At the time the accords were formed, as I mentioned, we were in the depths of the COVID pandemic, and this turned to be a sort of bright spot, one that I think was sorely needed. And I think that remains true now. We're looking for good news stories. This is one of them. It doesn't get the attention that it deserves, but the difference between conflict, which is what the region was known for, and the peace and the prosperity and the hope that the accords offer requires effort and work. I'm honored to have been part of the panel discussion, grateful for the time of both ambassadors, their efforts in bringing the accords to fruition and to support it since, and for your time and attention. I would ask if you would join me in thanking our two guests and the NRB.
Thank you.
Thank you all.